Hi folks, Rory here for the Team Venom Comics Show with a very quick introduction to this special episode. If you've been following the show, we were attempting to do it as a weekly comic book show, but however there's not been enough news, there's not been enough guests, just basically we want to keep doing stuff, but we essentially are limited based on what interests us. So one of the things that I'm going to keep doing is the greatest graphic novel guide, which the first 5 of which were part of the Team Venom Comics Show. So this video here is a little supercut of those 5 snippets all put together so that you can enjoy them all, and then going forward from next week there'll be a new one of these every Wednesday. So yeah, enjoy. Hello everybody, and welcome to the first episode of the Greatest Graphic Novel Guide. I'm your host Rory Bailey, and this week we're going to be talking about Frank Millar's Dark Knight Returns. As you can see from this, I've got all 3 of his trilogy laid out there: Dark Knight Returns, Dark Knight Strikes Again, and Dark Knight Master Race. So we'll get around to the other 2 at some point, but for today we're going to talk about the Dark Knight Returns. Firstly, the version I've got is from the Eagle Moss Legends of Batman collection. Sole reason this is the one that I'm using is that I've been spending a small fortune on all of these, and yeah, so these are the ones that I'm sort of sticking with. Anyway, so the Dark Knight Returns is a really awesome Batman story. One of the very first ones that I read came out around about 1986, I believe, which is also the same year that I was born. So yeah, but my uncle got me into Batman, and this was one of the books that he got me into. Essentially the story, he follows an elderly Bruce Wayne who's been retired for numerous years and has also grown a mustache, because of course, and a few bits and pieces on the news start coming out about the Joker and Harvey Dent who reformed and things like that. And in fact, there we go, there's old mustachio Bruce Wayne. And so there's like a little bit of an episode because of it, and then finds himself randomly nude in the Batcave, because of course he does, and his mustache has disappeared and he has no idea what. It's an actual sequence of events, probably the worst sequence of events in here, that he just loses a mustache, but it's still pretty damn cool. Some of the visuals in this are awesome as well. Yeah, it's just a great story, and it's basically Batman being old and, you know, in like a dystopian sort of future Gotham, and having to deal with various bits and pieces that have been thrown his way because of crime being rampant in the city. We also get like a few different versions of his classic costumes. We get a ridiculously good Batmobile there, the tank one, which was the influence for the Dark Knight movies. Yeah, as you can see that it was awesome. You've probably noticed as well, we've had a couple of different costumes so far. We've seen the grey and the blue, now we've got the black and the grey. I'm sure there's one with the big black back symbol as well at some point. But yeah, he sort of switches between a few of the different ones. Introduces the first female Robin, which is Carrie Kelly. However, that's I don't know whether it's classed as canon or not, but because it's obviously the future. But yeah, it's a really good story. And one of the first things that I remember reading in here that stood out for me as a child is that we get the ridiculously cool thing of, oh, by the way, there's the other costume. We get the thing of Superman being sent after Bruce, and this was also, I think this was also my introduction to the Green Arrow as a character. But we got a knockdown, slap down brawl between Bats and Supes, and I just remember it being so awesome, because obviously as a kid I knew who Superman was and how he's indestructible and everything, and then my uncle showed me this and was like, yeah, you get to see Batman just kick the ever-loving shit out of Superman in there, and he does. So let me just try and find that for you. Yeah, this is when they're gearing up to it, and as I'm sure you can see, there's lots of stuff that was visually influential on the Batman vs Superman movie as well, because of the armor that he's beating Superman up with. And yeah, it's just awesome. Just a really, really good story, and you get the little one-armed Oliver Queen cameo there, and Bruce Wayne just absolutely battering Superman for a while, and it's just a really good story. And I'd highly recommend it to anyone who's a fan of Batman or graphic novels, and a fan of Frank Miller's work, because Frank Miller's awesome. And then obviously the future reading for it is Dark Knight Strikes Again, which is where everything that happened in Dark Knight gets dialed up to 11 because of the Justice League coming back. And then following on from that is the Dark Knight Master Race, which builds on the lore that's been put together in the previous 2 books, and it's just a generally good read. So yeah, so I'd recommend all 3 of those. And as I say, if you've been on the fence about getting into comics, The Dark Knight Returns is the perfect gateway drug for comic book collecting. It's frigging awesome, and I can't say enough good things about it. So yeah, hope you've enjoyed this quick review, and I'll catch you next week with another one. Hello everybody, and welcome to the second episode of the Greatest Graphic Novel Guide. I'm your host Rory Bailey, and on this week's episode we're going to be talking about Wolverine Old Man Logan by Mark Millar and Steve McNiven. Now, I know last week I did Dark Knight Returns, and it's sort of appropriate because this is the Wolverine equivalent to that story. See, this is all set many years in the future, after the villains have all banded together and taken out most of the superheroes. Wolverine's become a farmer and also a pacifist to boot, and it's just really awesome. So the art from Steve McNiven is absolutely fantastic. It's the same creative team that did the Civil War graphic novel as well. Well, I say graphic novel start. Obviously, all of these have started off as mini-series first. And yeah, so we basically, at the moment, these pages that I'm showing you where it's got Wolverine popping his claws and stuff. I know I just said he's a pacifist. This is like a sort of fantasy thing that he's having, because instead of that actually happening, what's really happening is he's just getting his head pasted in because he refuses to do anything. And this guy with the shades here, that's Hawkeye, because he's blind, because why not? But yeah, no, the whole series is basically blind Hawkeye takes Wolverine on a road trip in the Spider-Mobile from the wonderful 80s Spider-Man comics, and takes him across the wasteland to make a special delivery to some form of resistance. Along the way, Wolverine ends up getting his edge back and goes from, goes from being the pacifist and whatnot to basically overthrowing the current rule. That's by the way, that's Peter Parker's granddaughter. How awesome is that? Let me just flick through to show you some cool stuff. The page that I'm on at the moment showing why Wolverine's a pacifist, and that's essentially that because the villains all switched it up. As you can see, Wolverine's having a very, very bloody battle here with a load of X-Men villains, and we've got this here. Let's just go into it. Bullseye saying, "Logan, stop, what are you doing? You're supposed to be our friend." Because it was all a ruse by Mysterio, the fishbowl-headed bastard. So Wolverine had actually massacred every single member of the X-Men. Obviously, that was at the X-Mansion at the time, because there's a few that pop up in the Wastelands at various points. Oh yeah, and then afterwards, Wolverine attempted to kill himself, but, healing factor, unbreakable bones and all that sort of stuff. And yeah. So, yeah, and we also got the bonus of the main villain of the piece being Red Skull, who's running America. And yeah, it's just awesome. He's wearing Bucky's Captain America uniform there as well. Artwork's absolutely stunning all the way through. It's a very good story, and I would highly recommend it to anyone. So yeah, so that's my weekly graphic novel review. Hope you've enjoyed it. Keeping these short and sweet and stuff. But yeah, here you go. welcome to episode 3 of the Greatest Graphic Novel Guide. I'm your host Rory Bailey, and this week I'm going to be talking about Red Moon by Mina Hwang. Now, as you can see from the video, there are 6 volumes here. These are the only 6 that have been translated to English, as this was, well, we'll bring this up on there. This was originally published in the 80s and such, and only 6 were translated, which is a shame because it's a really good story. The producer Comics One is one that I've hardly seen much by, to be honest, but yeah, it's a great story, really, and a great graphic novel. The artwork's brilliant, as you can see, very you know, obviously manga-ish, but the plot follows a high school kid called Filler, who has an accident, busts open his head, and it awakens like an extra sort of being inside of him called Millar, who has great power and you know, have strength, all this sort of stuff, and leads an extraterrestrial race as their Red Moon. So he's the titular Red Moon, and as you can see from some of these covers, there are no end of other sort of characters that are trying to awaken him. Some are protectors, and you know, that sort of thing. But it's pretty good. Annoyingly, there's a major cliffhanger with volume 5, and then volume 6 is sort of like a prequel to everything. And because nothing else got translated, I've no idea how it actually turned out, which is a shame. But it's a very good book. Very good series as a whole, and I'd highly recommend it. It's going to be very difficult to come by. I mean, I've got these 6 by luck, and pure luck only, and I essentially read volumes 1 and 2 when I'd gone to like some library somewhere with an ex, and that was, you know, I had a bit of time to kill. This was when I was probably about 15 or something. I'm now 35, and read the first 2, thought they were great, and then never saw them in the comic shop or anything. Looked out for them quite a bit, and then I went to Amsterdam for a weekend and found all 6 volumes for like the equivalent of about £3 each. So I've had these since I was 18, and I bought them in Amsterdam. So, you know, fun times. But yeah, it's a really great series. Highly recommend it. There was at one point in the early 2000s, there was an online RPG also called Red Moon, which was set in this world. And I believe you can still get copies of it, but the servers are like bare bones at the moment. So yeah, so that's it for this week, and I hope you've enjoyed this little video, and I'll see you all next time. Hello everybody, and welcome to the Greatest Graphic Novel Guide. This week's title is SpiderMan The Other, Evolve or Die, and that is a major crossover across Marvel Knight Spider-Man, Friendly Neighborhood Spider-Man, and Amazing Spider-Man. It's written by Peter David, J. Michael Straczynski, and Reginald Hudlin. There we go, you can see that on there. This is from 2005. I can remember collecting this series as it came out, and it was something that I was genuinely hyped for, because at the time, obviously, you can see there it was Friendly Neighborhood Spider-Man issue 1. So, as you'll have heard on countless episodes and podcasts before, I was a massive fan of Spider-Man comics, and JMS's run is one of my favourites. So when a new series started, I obviously jumped to that. So this story sees the return of Morlun, who had been introduced in the first storyline by JMS, which was called Coming Home. And yeah, we see a few other characters and such, but essentially Spidey finds out that he is dying, and so there we go. This is where Aunt May finds out about it as well, and basically marches straight in to see Dr. Richards and Stark and everyone about it, and you go through this whole thing of Spidey trying to, you know, not die, and it eventually comes down to a scrap between him and Morlun in one of the most gruesome scraps that's happened for Spidey.
because I'll find you this clip if I can remember exactly where it is. There's a whole point where during the middle of this big brawl that they're having, Morlan just eats his eye, just flat out plucks his eye. There you go. Switch, that is Morlan legitimately pulling Spider-Man's eye out and eating it, which is grim. But as you can see, Morlan basically beats him to near death, and then gets distracted by paramedics and decides he's going to go back to the hospital later to see him. We have, so pretty gruesome stuff, and you're obviously seeing what happens with MJ. This, at this point, is roughly, as you can see, the halfway point of the book as well. So all sorts happen. You get like the new Avengers trying to help MJ and things like that, and we essentially get like more of the sort of almost cosmic sort of level of or the spiritual level of Spidey's powers explored a bit more, and then he eventually comes back from the dead, and that's about it. As you can see, there's the fallout. That's the husk of his body where basically he shed his skin to be reborn. Which I've just given you the whole plot of the story, but it's still great, and it's just generally a really good book, and it's something that I can remember going into Forbidden Planet all the time to pick up each issue as it came out for the crossover, and it was thoroughly enjoyable. So yeah, that was this week's edition of the Greatest Graphic Novel Guide. Let's go back to me and Connor in the studio, and when I say studio, I just mean Zoom call. Okay, so for the latest episode of the Greatest Graphic Novel Guide, we're going to go with Saban's Power Rangers Soul of the Dragon by Kyle Higgins, art by Giuseppe Cafaro and Marcelo Costa, with a special guest consultant of Jason David Frank. The book tells the story of Tommy Oliver, who was you can see who he was by those. He was all 5 of those Rangers, basically. One of the most prolific Rangers on the entire show. And Jason David Frank pretty much is one of the biggest ambassadors for the Power Ranger branding. Now, on these Greatest Graphic Novel Guides, I've talked about Old Man Logan, I've talked about The Dark Knight Returns. This is essentially that sort of story, but for Power Rangers. And it reads like one as well. As you can see, that's Tommy Oliver in this. He's pretty gruff. There's a few flashbacks to some of his final fights and how he got some injuries at first. There we go, and we can see him switching between forms. And he's got a thing called a Master Morpher, which allows him to tap into any of his old morphing forms. Throughout the course of this story, he gradually switches back between them all. As you can see, there he is as the Dino Thunder Ranger. And there's the red turbo there. But essentially, he can use each power one last time until it runs out. So it's a pretty good story. There we go, you can see White Ranger on there. A few other Rangers. There's a few characters that make the return. Let me see if I can find it. I can't. But there's also like the Blue Lightspeed Rescue Rangers part of the storyline as well. And it expands upon the characters' family and such. He's now settled with Kat, which was the pink Mighty Morphin Ranger that took over from Kimberly, and carried on all the way to Turbo. And you see this other person wielding the Green Ranger suit there, that is his son JJ, who they referenced in a show called, an episode of Power Rangers Ninja Steel called Dimensions in Danger, where they essentially had loads of different Rangers team up because of some form of dimensional threat. So yeah, this was done first and they referenced it in that, which is pretty cool. And yeah, it's just a really good book. It's definitely worth a read. And well, I'll show you the RRPs and such. Standard pricing is pretty damn cheap, and it's all licensed by Boom. Sorry, it's printed by Boom and it's licensed by Hasbro, so it's all classed as continuity. Yeah, it's definitely worth a read. I'd highly recommend it. So yeah, back to me.